Welcome to the Speak the Language podcast presented by OnX Hunt. This week, we'll be taking an in-depth look at a species that has been residing in the state of Mississippi since before anyone that's listening to this episode has even been alive. It's a species that seems to be either loved or hated and is very, very commonly misunderstood. The goal of this entire episode is to garner a better understanding and acceptance for this animal, a better understanding of why the great state of Mississippi and the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks has been working to restore it for over 20 years, and a better understanding of what we may see in the future. It's time that we all learned a little bit more about bears. Anthony Ballard, you are the Black Bear Program Coordinator in Mississippi.
Yes, sir.
So what's interesting about that to me, right from where my mind first goes and some of the conversations that I often have with people just through talking about hunting or podcast topics or anything, there's some folks that aren't even aware that we have a Black Bear program in the state of Mississippi.
Yeah, and that's been... Since I came into this program, that was something that I really came to understand pretty quickly, was that people, a fairly significant portion of the population, mostly through social media, I've seen this, like comments and stuff, we have bears in the state. And it's something that I feel like, just recently coming into this role, that we can do a lot better job of is telling that story, because we've been doing bear research in Mississippi for 20 years now. Moved over from the museum to Wildlife and Fisheries in 2003.
So, and on that same point, just to kind of get to this at the very front end of the podcast, and you could probably speak to it at a more educated level than I could. Black bears, albeit not that this may not be something so widely known now. Black bears, they haven't just been here a long time. Like black bears have always been here, pretty much.
Yeah, and a lot of them, people kind of look at them as an introduced species. Yeah. Which really what happened was a near extirpation, and then they just slowly rebuilt back that native original range over time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, even in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they were an important game species. They were widely hunted, just like we take for granted, deer and turkey to hunt nowadays. Mm-hmm. So, you really, I would encourage folks to go and look. because I can geek out on this stuff. Honestly, I'd been interested in black bears since my days at Mississippi State, which you went to Mississippi State as well. Yeah,
right.
I did.
But I learned more about them there, and then kind of started, like you were saying. You grow up in this state, and you grow up and you're deer hunting, you're turkey hunting, you're duck hunting, squirrel hunting, whatever. You're just not. You're not around black bears because you're not seeing them, and there's really not that understanding there. And so I started to get, I guess, a better understanding of what a native species meant, and had a better understanding of their species that we had a whole lot of, and then almost lost them. Not too much different than what happened with deers and turkeys at one point.
Yeah.
So let's do this. So there, where you're working at in the Black Bear program, the need for the Black Bear program is that, obviously, like I said, we had a lot, and then, like you said, nearly extirpated. What happened? What was the cause is? I know it's a loaded question, but what happened, primarily big factors, for us to lose a lot of our black bears?
So there were several factors that kind of, sort of a perfect storm all at once, but essentially in the late 1800s, the reason the North American wildlife model came about, for those that are familiar with that history, was the fact that we had so much unregulated hunting, market hunting. So basically, it's illegal to kill a bird and to sell it today, for instance, any sort of game bird or whatnot. All of those laws that we appreciate now and understand the value of were not in place then. And so you had a lot of timber. Basically, you had a consumption that the resource could not keep up with. And so, the timeline has been different depending on which species it is. But essentially what's happened is, once that North American wildlife model came into play, once there were state and federal wildlife agencies to set those rules, enforce the rules, and to kind of build, a management that we've seen the benefits of today, all of those species really started to turn around and making a comeback. And really the only difference is the timeline. And so, deer and turkey rebounded pretty quick. There were some restocking efforts, obviously, that helped a lot. Also some restocking efforts in Louisiana with the black bear as well.
Okay.
And so, but the moral to the story of all that is the American alligator is another good example that's more recent. Mm-hmm. But in all of these species, it's kind of an opportunity to brag on, our predecessors in the wildlife world. They took that thing and turned it around completely into a rich resource that we can enjoy today, and to the point where a lot of people don't even know where that story once was. It was mighty grim, around the turn of the century.
Yeah, because think about it. Like now, the biggest thing that you hear, if anything, tied to whitetails on a negative is like CWD. But other than that, like no one's going, where are the deer? We have our deer population is pretty high. Our turkey population. You hear some, there's several talks about turkey numbers not being what but to your point, like go back and look what happened to a point where like turkeys were almost gone.
Right.
And so.
Yeah. And that's kind of the thing is like, one of the things that I want to shift or I guess help shape and guide is, back in the time of our grandfather, for instance, deer, when you saw a deer track or you saw evidence of a deer or turkey, that was something to get excited about, like a deer track. And it was sort of a novelty thing. It's like, oh my gosh, we have a deer on our place, or we have, whatever. And bears, I want to kind of bring that in from this kind of, novelty, exciting thing. Not that it's not exciting, but, something that's rare and nobody really talks about into a more mainstream, added to the same group that we think about as far as white-tailed deer and wild turkey and all the other game animals,
and understood and appreciated game species.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like to that point, and I've talked to you about this before. One podcast that I'm a huge fan of is Bear Grease that Clay Newcomb does. Mm-hmm. And he did a whole series on Holt Collier and Teddy Roosevelt, the bear hunt that happened here in the Delta.
Very well done. I'll listen to that one.
Yeah, it's. I would encourage anybody that's listening to this to go and listen to that series. But you hear him talking about, well, not just that series, but also he did a series on the Mississippi River. But one thing that I've just kind of come to figure out or wrap my head around, I guess, is how different things were. And so you hear him talking about these hunting stories with Holt Collier and black bear hunting, and he did a lot of it with dogs. And then you hear him talking about the Mississippi River and the Delta and all that. And they talk about it as if it's like, I think one of the times they refer to it as like this impenetrable wilderness. And then they just talk about seeing numbers upon numbers and numbers of bears. And it's almost like if I were to read a story in the Clear and Ledger Outdoor section or a Mississippi Woods and Water magazine, they're writing a story about turkey hunting in Mississippi, I can read it and it's going to be current so I can identify with it. But I hear these old stories of like Holt Collier bear hunting and I'm like, it almost sounds foreign.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you hear them talking about the way the woods were and the layout of the land, and you're like, that happened here? Here in this Mississippi? You know what I'm saying? Things have changed so much not geographically, but habitat wise and the landscape, and of course that's has a huge factor in what happened, but it's wild to think about and seeing where we are now.
Yeah, and like you said, it's valuable to know that history because you look at a satellite picture of what's now the Delta. So you look at all that ag land. At one point, it was all flooded by the Mississippi River. Depending on the water levels when they came up and down. They would come up and down extremely slowly. And the reason why that ground is so fertile is because all of those nutrients over thousands of years were distributed there. And, it was a completely different place. You're talking about swamps and, very, very old growth timber, virgin timber. And, you see the old photographs of people standing beside, these big logs that
it's huge tree.
Right. Yeah. The cross sections are, twice or three times what a grown man would stand. And, all that stuff you're right. It does seem foreign because it just seems unfathomable that things were that much different, but, they really were.
Yeah. I find myself, Jordan Blissett, especially when him and I were working, doing, the Primo's Truth about hunting together, and we'd be on these long trips and we'd have like a 18-hour drive to New Mexico or something. And for some reason, like a common topic of conversation that we'd end up on is, it's going to sound goofy, but we would always end up on like, if you could time travel to one place, where would you go? And so often, and I guess it's because, when we were doing, especially along the river, we just spent a lot of time in the Delta, and both of us agreed on several occasions, like if we could just see what it looked like there. I understand farming, I understand all that, but just to see what it was like.
Yeah.
Back when it was what you were describing, before the levee systems, before it was ag land, just to see it and see, the diversity of the biodiversity, the forest composition, just to see how different it would be. But that would be just always something that I've thought about.
Yeah, definitely. That's it was a whole different world.
Yeah. So how did you yourself end up in the position of Black Bear Program Coordinator?
So I started with the agency in 2015 and was hired on, went through Mississippi State, as you mentioned, went through University of Louisiana at Monroe, got my master's there, graduating, came back home to Mississippi, started with the agency as the nuisance species biologist. So that included several different species, most notably wild hogs. That's where
you were on the show before talking about it.
That's right, yeah. And that was where all of the time and effort was needed. That was the biggest need for the agency at the time, and so that's what I spent most of my time doing. But one of the beauties of this agency is you get to experience a lot of different things, and that's what I tell people. Not to kind of go off on a tangent, but young people that are coming up that are wanting to do something in the wildlife world, to get as much experience as you possibly can, because I kind of got to dip my toes off into the bear program, go on several workups and trapping events and collar stuff, and took several chemical immobilization classes that that whole time I was building my resume for the bear program, but didn't really know it. And so the experience I got there, long story short, came over to the bear program in November when the former program leader, Richard Rummel, retired, and then kind of took over those responsibilities in the interim. And then after den season and everything was over, slightly before, but February of this year, took over the bear program.
Gotcha. And obviously you've been enjoying it.
I've been loving it. Yeah, it's been awesome.
So I wanted to make sure we're not leaving any stone unturned, or I don't want us to say a term and somebody mess up on what it says. Just from talking to you about this leading up to this podcast and stuff, one thing I've heard you say multiple times is you talk about a workup, like a bear workup, on a very granular level. When you say that, what does that mean?
So every program is going to have its main staple of what they do. A lot of that is research, and so we've worked in partnership with MSU on multiple different research projects over 50 plus years. But essentially, what we do in a workup and kind of research as a whole in the bear program has a lot to do with trapping, putting collars on. So in the olden days, in a decade or so before, they were all VHF collars. And so they would emit a VHF frequency. You had to actually go out and manually triangulate those. Now we have GPS collars where they send them to my account via satellite. It makes it a lot easier. But essentially, so we're tracking movements, and then we're also taking samples and measurements. We've got historical data about reproduction. We've got data on different subpopulations within the state. And then, of course, with movement, you can get things like home range, habitat preference, den site selection. There's a lot of little, parts that you can kind of tease out. But essentially, learning as much about the critter here in the state as we can, and then, applying that to a bigger picture whenever it comes time for things like population estimates and other, bigger things that you have to have all that stuff to put together.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, like you said, the 20 years of research, or however long it was before you took over. Not asking you to go in depth to that, because I'm sure that would take a while. But basically, what was done? Where did we start when we first started this bear research, and then kind of where was the program when you picked it up, and was like when you were past that baton, it was like, all right, this is where we're at, this is where we're trying to go.
Yeah. So part of it was standing there with the baton, looking around, trying to figure out what to do with it. But
yeah, I get that.
yeah, but so one thing to keep in mind first is most of the bears we have, if not all, came originally from out of state.
Okay.
So you have big source populations like Tensas National Wildlife Refuge, very dense bear population.
Okay.
White River region there in Arkansas, very big. So, the bears in Bolivar County, for instance, most of them came from Arkansas in the North Delta. Most of the South Delta bears came from somewhere from across the river. So either directly from or that lineage can be traced back to that subpopulation.
Did we have any native bears that we knew about?
Yeah, there were, and I would have to, and don't quote me on this, but I think it was somewhere a couple dozen to maybe up to, maybe it was around a dozen.
So, I mean, extremely small.
Extremely low, yeah. So
how'd they even know they were there? For it to be that few?
Well, I mean, sightings for one.
Yeah.
That would probably be what they would most rely on. And then, again, the good thing about the collars is, you're looking at a battery life of 2-3 years, and so if you get one collared, and then you can always go back and find it, particularly during deer season, den season, you can have a collar on that bear for decades.
Yeah.
Bear's lifespan is generally somewhere between 20 and 30 years, and so you can get a lot of data off of just one collared bear. And so, most of the research that occurred was from those early immigration from out of state into our state that we were able to find bears, trap on those properties, and really keep up with those populations. And then as they had cubs, we could sort of monitor that as it moved. So what we're kind of transitioning into now is, not that we didn't work in other places of the state, but like the South Delta, Warren, Issaquah County, Steel Bayou area, that was kind of the breadbasket of the research then. But then now what we're doing is trying to spread into other parts of the state, so we can get genetic samples. So like most of the bears we have in the southeast, they came from that population in the Mobile Basin.
Okay.
They kind of came over from there. And so, figuring out where the bears had come from, how many we might have there, and then trying to take, right now there's a multi-state project where there's genetic samples from Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, where we're going to take all that stuff and put it together and together have a lot better idea of, what the big picture is. Gotcha.
So I guess, how did they go, and I'm kind of going back a little bit. They knew they had maybe a dozen bears, and so how did they land on the process of we're going to start doing some translocation or whatever? That may be the wrong term. Is that the right term?
Telemetry?
No, like trapping and moving bears.
So I don't know that there were any bears moved into Mississippi. So the only stocking effort, and that's actually a good thing to touch on because we get accused of that all the time, bringing bears in and panthers and whatever else.
Sure, yeah.
But we don't get the credit for the restocking for deer and turkey.
A lot of people don't know that happened either.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah, you're right. But anyway, so the only restocking effort that I'm aware of in our records were, I think, in like 1935, 34, something like that. I think there were a couple breeding pairs that were brought in. It was a complete failure. I don't know if the bears didn't make it or didn't, reproduce, whatever the case was.
Gotcha.
It wasn't noticed as a success. And so, like I said, that basically left the bears from mostly across the river, to slowly come into Mississippi and then start building the breeding population from there.
Gotcha. So talking about, before I get into that, I've heard you say things like denning season and stuff like that. So going back to trying to get, and I'm talking about, like, I'm going to learn something in this conversation too, I'm sure, but I'm most positive there's going to be people that listen to this that are talking about any type of black bear ecology or black bear life cycle is going to be brand new. Mm-hmm. So again, on a very elementary level, like what does a year look like for a bear? When is denning season? Any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So, we'll start in the springtime.
Okay.
A bear, so typically somewhere in the neighborhood of, so we do our den checks the first couple weeks in March. And so it could be, depending on the sex and age of the bear, we're talking, sometime late March, early April, maybe even as late as May, those bears emerging from the den. So let's say it was a sow, she's had cubs. All right, so she has cubs in the den, they come out, they go around in the springtime, they start to replenish those resources that they used. The cubs start to eat. Then breeding season comes around in July and August. So that sow will not breed if she has cubs. Another thing, bears actually breed every other year. So if it's a sow without cubs, then she'll breed during the summer. And then during the fall, they enter a phase called hyperphagia, where basically they're stuffing their face with as many calories as they can get.
Relatable.
To try to, right, yeah. I could be accused of that myself. But so they're trying to, get as much fat resources as they can to sustain through the winter.
Yeah.
And so, during the spring and summer, it's a lot of just kind of opportunistic, I guess like a pulse resource kind of thing, where you've got different berries and natural vegetation that's coming available, depending on the habitat and that kind of thing. And then coming back into the fall, once they build that fat layer up, they'll go into the dens. So the cubs will stay with the adult sow for about 18 months. So, they'll be born in the den, they'll den the next year, and then when they come out that following spring, sometime between there and breeding season, they'll disperse and go do their own thing. That sow will breed again. The process starts over. So
it happens, there's a similarity, but there's definitely, so like a whitetail. How about, all right, so a sow, how old is she going to be before she can start having cubs?
Yeah, so sexual maturity is going to be somewhere between 3 and 5 years.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're waiting 3 to 5 years for her to be old enough to have cubs. And then when she has cubs, it's going to be every other year?
Every other year. And you can expect, on average, 2 to 3 in a litter. We've seen, so we had one this past year that a hunter just happened to stumble across. Mm-hmm. It was a cartoon type den. It was a big hollowed out oak tree and a big kind of A-shaped, triangular shaped hole at the bottom. And she had the babies in there. There were 4 in that litter. 4. There have been 5 documented, just a handful of times. And, the 20 years that we've been keeping up with it, it's almost unheard of, but it does happen. Mm-hmm. But like I said, generally, 2 to 3 cubs every other year. Yeah. And so every other year, and then not only like a doe, she has a fawn or 2 fawns. Normally, they get 6 months old and she's going to kick them loose. And these cubs are staying with them 18 months. Right. And not only that, but a fawn, a deer can do that at, rarely as a fawn, but definitely as a 1.5 years old. Yeah. So you're talking about they're starting that reproductive path a lot sooner, and then they're repeating that every year as well. Yeah. And sometimes, that's wild. Sometimes they even make it with their mama 6 months. They just turn them loose into the world and watch them go. Yeah. It's just so that answers one question for me. Because a black bear population, simply by numbers, they can't rebound as quick as a deer can or a turkey can because of the breeding difference in timing. Yeah, and the dispersal is a little bit different too. Generally, so when you see a real out of place bear, so for instance, there was a viral video of a bear that just came up in the surf in Destin. It was all over social media. I saw that. Yeah. When you see those kind of things, there was one in Indianola this year that made big news. There was another one in, where was that? Vicksburg, that ran through downtown Vicksburg. Yeah. A lot of times when you see a bear that's just completely out of place, it's how in the world did a bear get here? Yeah. Most of the time that's a young male. Okay. So he's going to be maybe the first or second summer out on his own. He's trying to find his way in the world, trying not to get his behind whipped by bigger bears. And it's, kind of the same similarity where, a spike is going to walk out at 3:00 in the afternoon in the middle of a food plot in the broad daylight. Yeah. They just don't really know better yet. They're just now on their own. They don't have that adult female to say, hey, probably not a good idea. And, a lot gets shot as a result. Sure. But it's kind of that same mentality where they're dispersing for the first time, trying to find their way in the world, and a lot of times they can disperse a long way before they finally kind of settle out and start doing their thing.
Yeah. Wonder what the black bear program coordinator in Florida was thinking when he saw that video of that one in Destin.
I'm trying to remember. No, that was a little bit after. We had a black bear workshop up in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And actually met those guys. It's super cool dudes. But they have to deal. So you've got Destin there, and then you've got Orlando, and some of those big cities like that. They deal with a lot of nonsense from people and bears crossing
just like
paths.
Conflict and stuff.
Yeah, I mean conflict, and of course there's always politics around it and public relation things, and I mean when you get into those really bigger cities like that, the mentality around wildlife and stuff can be wildly different from other areas, and so hats off to those guys. They do they deal with a lot there in Florida.
So that brings me to another topic that I wanted to ask you about anyway. I feel like with bears, often what you get is I think I'd call it like almost like a varmint mentality towards them. Mm-hmm. Where sometimes, just had like passing conversation with folks, and I've even gotten like why in the world are we even trying to repopulate these things? That kind of thing. How often do you have to deal with that, or how do you address that?
Fairly often. One thing's for sure, and one thing that I learned like very early on is there are very few people that have a neutral attitude toward bears. Everybody
true.
Everybody feels very strongly in some particular way.
That's a good point.
But yeah, the varmint mentality, it's one of those things. Even in a public forum, like on social media and stuff, people say, why do we need bears? Why are we bringing in bears? And basically 2 points that I always make. Number one, we're not bringing in bears. Number two, we don't move bears at all. And I guess that would be 3 points. But number three, like we said before, they are a native game species. A native wildlife species. We hope the numbers allow them to become a game species again. But with all that being said, just because they're starting to come back into public, awareness, kind of into the public conscience as something that's actually a practical thing. Like, I have to deal with this now because it's on my property. It's not theoretical anymore when you get one on your game camera.
Yeah.
And so to try to make that transition to just those simple practical steps to avoid conflict and just to kind of, cut some of that stuff off before it becomes an issue is, I think, kind of the next step that we're trying to move toward as far as like a public awareness and education type thing.
Yeah. I think you make 100%. I agree with like there's no neutral thoughts on bears, because I 100% agree with that. I do think that whether someone leans onto the side of varmint or whatever it is, I think both of those things, I think it comes from just a simple lack of understanding for the animal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's like, because I have friends, especially guys that work at the home base at Onyx in Montana, that black bears are nothing new.
Right.
They're plentiful around there throughout much of the West, and it's they're just used to it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's one of those things. And I mean, even to go, something closer to home, like in the Smoky Mountains, for example.
Yep.
Tons of bears in the Smoky Mountains. You can't find anybody in the Smokies that doesn't handle their garbage correctly. I mean, I'm sure there's some, but it's a lot more rare.
Sure.
You have a lot more bear-proof trash cans. You have a lot more thought in that realm because, like I said, if you have a neighborhood dog that knocks over the trash can every night, you're going to make adjustments to maybe stop that. So maybe taking your trash out the day of versus the night before. Just little small things like that where maybe you haven't had to make those adjustments before, but like you said, in other parts of the country, it's just something that they do.
Right. Well, I mean, imagine if we didn't have white-tailed deer, and then all of a sudden we did, and we didn't know how to handle them. People would be like, these things are eating in my garden. These things are running across the road. They're just these things that we don't think about because everyone that's essentially alive in the state right now has are very used to having white-tailed deer around,
right.
So they just kind of know how to act.
Yeah, they're completely ubiquitous. That was actually the point, the example I was going to use. Was white-tailed deer, because they're completely ubiquitous. Everybody understands that if you have a garden that's got nice green, nutritious growth, you're going to have to protect it if you're in an area where you have deer, which is almost everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So, like I said, just to kind of make that transition, the old saying, your body won't go where your mind hasn't already been, to kind of put that in people's brains and, to try to be proactive about it as possible, where it's not all of a sudden, holy smokes, there's a bear in my yard or on my place. It's like, kind of saw this coming, need to make some adjustments, and life goes on.
Yeah, so, you touched on this a little bit, but I want to ask about it further. I feel like in the past, I'd say recent years, I can't put really a timestamp on it, but I feel like I've been seeing more pictures of bears, more videos of bears, more people talking about bears. It seems to me like it's like that there's more bears, so to speak. And I don't know if that's actually the case or if there's just been increased awareness about them, so people are getting more pictures. Are you I guess seeing a population increase, or what do you think the story is there?
I don't think the population increase. Yes, there's a population increase. I don't think it's changed all that dramatically. I'll give you another example. So when people say, where do I report a bear sighting? We always direct them to the website. So mdwfp.com.
Okay.
Go to the wildlife and hunting, navigate to the black bear program, and you'll see two buttons there. So on the top it says report a bear observation, and on the bottom, kind of below the bear picture there, there's a link to actually click on a map where you can view all the sightings that have been reported. So all that, we tell people to report. So on that, kind of a tab off to the side, it shows a yearly breakdown of how many reports have been filed in that year.
Gotcha.
So it was created in 2016. That was when it was first, put together and went live. So every year preceding this one, I did an average somewhere between 50 and 60 observations.
Okay.
This past year, 2023, and we're not all the way through it, just keep that in mind, there's been 199.
Yikes.
Does that mean that there's 3 times the bear out there? That's a 280-something% increase.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that mean that there's that much of a jump in 1 year? Surely. Obviously not. But I think that there's such a heightened awareness around bears. I think a lot of it, not to take credit for all of it, certainly, but that's part of what our program has done is put a lot of that, information and awareness out there, because, that's where education starts, is awareness. Once people understand that we have bears, they're going to be something that we're all going to have to, work around and be educated about.
Yep.
That's where that starts. And so that's what I've really been, trying to push our agency toward, is kind of establishing that baseline and say, okay, you've got bears. Now here's what we do with them. Here's how we handle them, and kind of go from there.
Yeah.
So definitely an increased awareness around that. And, like I said, I'm hoping that these next few things that we have planned over the next year, and then even beyond that, is gonna really even push that a lot further. Right.
What do you have any sort of other type of social media outlets other than just the Report a Bear on the MDWFP site?
Yeah, so we got the main website. That's still how we tell people to actually report a sighting, especially if it's somewhere where we don't normally see bears that often, that we really want to capture that data.
Gotcha.
But one of the things we did at the end of the spring of it'll be spring of 2023, this past spring.
Gotcha.
We put out a bear week on social media.
I saw that.
That was on the main Wildlife and Fisheries website.
Yeah, that was the one where there was like a video of you up a tree with like a harness on.
Yeah. And that was on a den check, so we can talk about that too. But so that whole week we reached like it has a post reach, was basically how many people were exposed to that content.
Yeah.
Was like right around 600,000.
Wow.
Pretty big lick. I feel like we made a lot of, like establishing that baseline of like, hey, we have bears, we have a bear program, we're doing research, here's a few baseline type details, a few fun facts about bears, that kind of thing. And then at the very end of that week, I launched a Facebook group, and so it's not officially part of the Wildlife and Fisheries, page at all. But it's called Mississippi Black Bear Photos. And so from, I think it was April the 2nd when that group went live to now, it's got a little over 7,000 members now.
Wow. Okay.
And so it's, as the name implies, it basically runs itself. It's a public group. Anybody can join. And the sole purpose is to put pictures of black bears from Mississippi on this site. The thought behind that was, our website asks for a lot of information. Somebody that's not quite as computer savvy, or maybe just doesn't want to be bothered to put in that information, everybody wants you to see their game camera pictures. And so it's easy to just take one off your phone, put it online, post it. All we require is the picture in the county, and that goes up for people to see. And that website, that group has been really good for that, but then I've also had a lot more utility with it as well that I wasn't really expecting.
Yeah, utilities such as?
So at first it was just to kind of share pictures and
raise awareness.
Yeah. And then also sort of for me, some of that stuff, some of those pictures and sightings that our website wasn't catching, possibly I could catch some of those as well.
Gotcha.
Sort of a tangential, supplementary type thing. But then, we went into this trapping in southwest Mississippi going into this summer. And, in the South Delta, like I said, we've got lots of contacts there. We've got tons of people that have worked with this agency for years now, that are, all we have to do is pick up the phone and say, hey, we'd like to trap a bear.
Sure.
They say, come on, I'll tell you where they are. And we put the traps out. It's no problem.
Well, I mean, from an uneducated standpoint, right? Like, I've always known that region. I'm like, to me, I'm like, that's the region that has the most bears. That's
right.
That's what I've understood it as. So it makes sense.
Well, and like I said, that's also where we've done the most research and where, a lot of those people are most familiar about where bears frequent. And it's very easy to do research in that area, mostly because of the contacts we have. Well, then, going into this southwest region, Wilkinson County, Claiborne, Copiah, even into, let's say, Adams, what was the other one? Franklin County, those down in there, we started to kind of grow that and put some collars out where we haven't had them out nearly as much and don't know as much about those bears because it's a different type of habitat. There may be a completely different pattern that they have. And so, to kind of expand that research, well, we don't have the contacts down there that we do in the Delta because we haven't done research there as long.
Gotcha.
And so where the social media came in was, you've got a guy that maybe posts a picture and says, last night, Wilkinson County, right by a corn feeder. And then, you message the guy and he says, yeah, this bear's been showing up every day this week. And then all it takes is like, hey, would you mind if we come down and do some trapping? Sure. And then, the next couple of days, we've got a trap down there. We've got a bear collared. So it's, that was one of the utilities that I didn't expect to get out of the site.
Sure.
But now that it's like, and that was kind of in its infancy, that was like early in midsummer where you're talking, 2,000 or 3,000 people. Now there's 3 times that many. And you're really, you really got a lot of, like a big base to work from that's growing by the day.
Yeah. So this Mississippi Black Bear Photos is relatively new.
It's very new.
And so, you're really just scratching the surface of what you could get out of this.
Exactly.
That's cool.
And so another thing that it kind of happened organically, but people are obviously there to see black bears. They're at least interested in black bears passively. And so one thing that I started to incorporate was the research that we were doing in this area, because we were putting this stuff out. Hey, if you see black bears, let us know. If you're in these counties, if you're in these areas, give us a call, email us, whatever. Well, what I wanted to do was like keep those people engaged and say, hey, we're having some success here. We've got this bear collared in Wilkinson County now. This is number M34 or whatever. And as that started to build, it kind of snowballed to where every capture I would have, I would put it out there. And then what happened is, not long after that, those bears started showing back up again on the website. And so now there's not a single bear that we've caught and collared out of 21 bears that hasn't shown back up on Mississippi Black Bear Photos again.
That's cool.
Either on the same property or on a different one.
That's cool.
And so it's, like I said, it started as a pretty simple idea, and it's the utility of it and the benefits of it have kind of grown as the group has grown.
I think just on the functionality for you, it's cool, but it's also cool because, again, it's like I thought that before you and I had ever started talking about this. It's like I've just, without a doubt, seen an increased awareness about black bears. So it means you're doing something right. And I mean, because it's like you can't, talking about, what we were talking about earlier about the different attitudes toward bears, and a lot of it comes from just a lack of understanding of that species. Well, you can't, to appreciate something, you have to understand it first.
Right.
And so you're steadily growing the amount of awareness and the amount of education about these animals. It's definitely going in the right track.
Yeah, and I think there's also value because, you can find any information you want to on the internet, accurate or otherwise. And so in a group like this, I feel like that, a lot of people know who I am, a lot of which have worked directly with me, and they know that they're going to get good, accurate information on this site. And so it's outside of a group like this, we're just screaming into the internet. But then in this group, it's like, if something goes out with me in a uniform, or something goes out, some kind of article, I have to approve it. And so, when it goes on that site, I pay very close attention to make sure that there's good information going out, and it's not something that's going to be, too subjective or anything like that. And I think that's a good, it's going to serve as a good resource to people like that too.
So talk me through, you've mentioned about you find these bears or, through whatever avenue it goes about, and you mentioned trapping a lot. Walk me through one, I'm asking this selfishly because I'm eager to go on one of these, which we tried to do several times this summer and just never worked out. But
you are a hard man to catch up with.
Dude, it was just part of it's I'm going to blame some of it on my job, and I'm going to blame the other part of it on my wife. She kept me running around all over the place this summer. But talk me through the trapping. Talk me through how you get these bears to where you're in a position to collar them. Talk to me about how are you getting the collar? Explain it, from the ground up.
Yeah, and that's been kind of an evolution too for me, because the original kind of formula was we put out usually day old donuts. They're easy to get. The bakeries, if they don't sell them all that day, they throw them away. So you can get them by the garbage bag loads for free. And so a lot of the ones in the South Delta there, we'll call them are these for the bears? Yep. And then we'll go load them up and go use them. So, it's been all with culvert traps. So essentially a culvert trap, giant mouse trap, big steel or aluminum tube. And there's a gate on a guillotine door on one side that drops and traps the bear.
Gotcha.
So the bear has to actually go in, step on a panel, pull on a lever, some type of trigger that's going to activate that door to drop. So like I said, essentially a giant mousetrap. And those have caught a lot of bears. All right. And I'm not taking anything away from them. But what I started to see pretty quick into this thing was some trap aversion. So we use cell cameras to monitor those.
Sure.
And it was pretty often that we were getting bears that would go up to these traps, sniff around, and decide, no thanks, and they'd go their own way.
You think they're getting wise to it?
Well, I don't know. I think it probably has to do with some trap shyness that comes with just age and experience.
Gotcha.
And we also saw kind of a different preference in bait as well. I had bears early on in the summer. You put out a big thing of donuts that's got peanut butter and syrup dripping off of it, and they'd walk right past it to go to a corn feeder that was 10, 15 yards away. Perfectly good bait there, and they're passing it up to go to something else. And so that kind of started me down the path of making some changes to try to tweak these things to make them the most effective as possible.
Gotcha.
One of the other big things is heat. Obviously in the summer we had that spell that was 100 plus degrees for several weeks.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous hot.
Yeah.
And, when you put a bear under anesthesia, any mammal, they lose a lot of ability to control their body temperature. Typically, it goes hot.
Okay.
And so if you've got a bear, a mammal that has a black fur coat on in the summertime, it is extremely hard to keep that bear cool if you're working it up in the daytime.
Dude, they had to be miserable this summer.
It was, yeah. So most of our workups were actually at night.
Okay.
But one thing that I wanted to do to kind of control all these different factors, so I mentioned I came from the pig program. We've been running automated pig traps that you can drop remotely from your phone for years now.
Yeah.
Okay. And the first time we actually did that was in 2019 on the levee. Whenever the flood was up, we had several bears. I think we ended up catching like 3 bears in 4 days. But what we did was we set that camera up and we're able to, and that was the duct tapes and zip ties version, but we were able to retrofit that trap where we could drop it remotely. And so that was kind of the first step, was to integrate the camera system into it. Excuse me. And then after that, it was like, okay, well, this big steel box is, it get pretty warm in the daytime.
Yeah.
And if you have a manual trap, you can't control when it goes off. And so what that kind of led me into was building what's called a Cambrian trap. And so instead of a tubular trap, you have one that's much larger, it's longer, it's wider, and it's all the walls are expanded metal. And so it's basically like a big box instead of a tube.
Right.
And so it's more open, so it's less confining. Obviously, the airflow is 100% through the expanded metal there. And then when you integrate the camera in with it, you've got a system there that you can completely control. Not only that, but it's also safer for the bears because it gives you a little bit more time, as long as they're in the shade and, an area that you might not could drop with a regular trap, now you can with this one. And so it brought a whole new world of controllability once I put those two things together and started trapping.
So you're not having to, drop the gate and be like, we got to get there right now, just because the trap's a little bit more conducive for what you're trying to do. It gives you a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, you can completely pick your shots. And so we're trying to select for, in Southwest Mississippi, we're basically looking for anything that would go into a trap. But of those bears, all that bear's got to do is step 4 feet into that trap and I can catch it. Another thing that it allows you to do is, like, for instance, we had a sow and a cub that was coming into the trap. I could wait until that cub completely came inside the trap so that I didn't drop it on him. Because on a regular trap, if that sow triggers the door, it could possibly drop on that cub that's on his way into the trap with mama. And so, that was another thing. There was a sow and cub. I passed them up because they came in during that time that was like 100 plus degrees in August. All right. They came in at like 11:30. They were standing inside the trap. There was no way I could trap those bears and work them up safely as hot as it was going to be. So I had to pass them, let them walk out so fast forward to October, I set the trap about a mile away. I caught that same sow and cub. I was able to catch them on a morning where it was 60 something degrees, work them up safely and let them go. That would have never been possible. I would have never gotten that sow back into a trap if I had trapped her and then had to let her go with a manual trap.
Right.
Because when you set those manual traps, number one, you better be checking them. And number two, you have no idea when and where they're going to go off.
I suppose. Yeah, you don't know what you're catching either. Whereas like now you're seeing sow and cub. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, every now and then you'd have like one of the big problems we had down in Wilkinson was raccoons. And we had, the grad students down there were constantly walking down and letting raccoons out of the trap. And that's something with this trapping system, literally none of that is an issue. And it also allows you to select for a particular bear. So let's say we're looking for one particular bear that had a collar, for instance. We had to change the collar or whatever the case was. I can pass up every single bear that comes into that area or that comes into that trap in favor to trap that one. And then when that one comes in, I can get him. Or if we're trying to exclude one particular one, like it just gives you complete control over that situation that you just can't have any other way.
So just incredibly more efficient.
Yeah. I'm sitting there watching a live stream video. My delay time from the time I push the button on my phone to the time that gate drops is about 1.5 seconds.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like up to the second. There was nowhere I trapped this year that I had any kind of service problems or lagging, issues or whatever. And, man, it was just efficient. So we trapped a total of 18 bears over the summer. 13 of those were trapped with automated traps.
So just the amount of different management decisions you're able to make now. from timing, location, specific bears. Yeah, I mean that's a huge step in efficiency.
Yeah, and not only that, but so like I said, a lot of them were night workups. So we've got our lights in there that illuminate just like it was daytime. So we can dart that bear, and a lot of times, especially with the drug that we're using now, they get sort of front heavy. So they'll want to go down kind of nose first, and if they go down in a weird way, they can constrict their airway. And so you want to reduce the stimuli as much as possible to let that drug take effect. So we could dart that bear, walk away from the out of sight and out of earshot completely, and I could sit there and monitor that bear on my phone and watch that drug take effect to make sure that he or she went down safely.
Okay.
And so with another, with the manual traps, you'd have to constantly walk back up, shining with a flashlight, make sure everything was okay. And so, like I said, it gives you complete control of that situation.
Yeah. So, I mean, you get a bear in a trap and you get down there. What's the process there? Are you trying to get I know you have multiple people there for a workup, but for the darting, is it just one person trying to ease down there to minimize them from freaking out, or what's the process there?
So typically, all right, so we've got a bear in a trap.
Okay.
I like to have, I've had as few as me and somebody else. I like to have 4 to 5 people with me.
Okay.
And so usually it's me and one other person that goes originally to actually, first to actually dart the bear.
Okay.
We'll dart the bear, make sure the dart injected properly, make sure that the drug was delivered correctly, take notes of all, we have to write everything down. So that's the main job of that other person, is to write down dates, like the times of injection sites and all that.
How are you doing the injecting? Is it like a dart gun or something?
CO2. Yeah.
Okay.
So the darts we're using now actually has a one-way valve in the back. And so when you shoot that dart, it's actually pressurized as it goes down the barrel. And then when it hits, there's a cap on the front that the needle actually punctures through and into the bear's skin and into the muscle. And once that cap gets punched through, it's allowed to release that pressure, and then the drug gets injected after it goes through the skin and into the muscle.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You shooting it in the hind quarter or something?
We try for either hind quarter or shoulder or neck.
Okay.
But typically I try to do hind quarter just because that's the biggest margin of error, and if the shot's slightly off, it's a big muscle mass, and so you're likely to get it where you need it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So once you shoot it, then you back out, or what do you do then?
Yeah, so we'll back out. Generally with those, depending on, we use 2 different drugs over the summer.
Yeah.
But typically you're looking at 5 to 10 minutes for that drug to take effect. Mm-hmm. Once the bear's down, we verify that he's down under anesthesia. One of the first things that we do is take a temperature, because we want to make sure that core body temperature hadn't already started to run away from us.
Right.
Another kind of side note, we started using a drug called BAM this year, kind of about halfway through the summer, that has an antagonist. And so 2 of those 3 drugs in that cocktail can be reversed. So you knock the animal down, but then if you have something that starts to go sideways, if you have a body temp that you just can't reverse, you can't get her cooled down, him cooled down, whatever, you can give 2 injections, and 5 to 10 minutes they're standing up and running off.
Really?
It's that quick.
So you can reverse it pretty quickly.
Yeah. So it gives you a safety net if something does start to go wrong, where you can correct that. And like I said, it gives you another element of control. So, all right, so we got the bear down, we take a temperature's good, and so then we'll start with our workup. So the first thing that we do, if we don't get anything else done, we want to have that collar on. So we'll put the collar on, we'll put the physical marker, so we put ear tags in, and then, so for anybody in Mississippi that wants to know, the way we do our ear tagging system, we have a white and a green tag. White is right on females, and green is right on males.
Okay.
So they're swapped. So if you see a bear with a white ear tag, that's a female in the right ear. And then if it's white in the left ear, it's a male.
Gotcha.
So anyway, so we put our ear tags in, we put a pit tag in, which is basically a microchip that's like veterinarians put them under the skin of dogs and cats and stuff. So essentially it's a scannable barcode that even if all the ear tags came out, even if the collar came off, we can always identify that bear as long as that little scannable pit tag stays in the skin, under the skin. So once we do all that, we'll take weight. We'll this new drug that we have, we start them on supplemental oxygen as well. So that oxygen is running the whole time that we have the bear under. We're constantly monitoring, the body temperature, respiration, heart rate, all that kind of stuff. And then, assuming that everything goes smooth, we make it through the workup, which is, the drugs are really safe. Usually that's the case. A couple I had to reverse, but it's not very common. And then, we have all that stuff that's done. We have all of our data. We take body measurements. So we'll take genetic samples, which is usually a sample of hair. We'll take blood a lot of times for tests for different diseases. And then we'll also sometimes, depending on if we're able to or not, and if we have enough time, we'll actually take a tooth sample too.
What's that? So, how do you take a tooth sample?
So it's the maxillary premolar, and it's a pretty small tooth. It's technically surgery, but it's, of all the teeth, it's the most minimally invasive. Oh, so you're actually taking a tooth? We extract the tooth. Yeah. Okay. And so what we do is those go off to a lab. They take a cross section of that, and they can do a cementa manuali to actually age the bear. So since bears have a distinct, quote unquote, growing and dormant season, it's summer and fall, and spring, summer, and fall, and then the winter where they kind of go into that metabolic time, power save mode, so to speak. There's a very clear rings, sort of like on a tree, that appear on that on a cross section of that tooth.
Gotcha.
So that's an all for aging. So once we get all that stuff done together, we'll give the reversal drug. And like I said, it's not like they take hours and hours to wake up, like with the old drugs that we used. When you give that injection, we'll give 2 intramuscular injections, and they stand up and they run off. It's that fast.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool to see them come out of it.
So on a standard workup, nothing, everything goes to plan from the moment you dart the bear and walk off to the moment the bear runs off. How long of time period?
So we'll start, we record timestamps on each little milestone that we do.
Yeah.
And from the time the dart hits the bear to the time that he actually runs off, typically is going to be right around an hour. The actual workup takes, it was actually really consistent this year. I look back on some of my data sheets. We were hitting between 40 and 45 minutes on a workup almost every single one. And so, and that kind of goes toward number one, the quality of help that I had, but number two, you kind of get in a groove and you're just going from one to the next. And, there were some guys that went with me on every workup, and I didn't even have to say anything. They were getting me the next tool that I needed, writing down the next piece of data and whatever. And that really makes everything flow really smoothly.
So it's at that point, you're like a NASCAR pit crew. Y'all are just kind of going and everyone knows what they're supposed to do, and then up and the bear's back out.
Yeah, and that was one thing I tried to do that I'm so glad I started doing on the front end when I started doing these workups, because, being on a workup and being the guy that everybody's looking at on that workup, being the leader of it, are two completely different things.
I can imagine.
But one thing that I started doing, at the very beginning was, before we go in to do anything with the bear, we sit everybody down and everybody gets their job. So you're the guy that's taking all the data. You're going to be the ones that grab the weigh poles to assemble them to get a weight. Y'all are going to be taking temperature, respiration, pulse. And when we get up to that bear, everybody knows what they do, and they immediately start doing it. If you don't have a job, then you don't have a job. If you do, you know what it is. And that helped everything. Even if it was somebody that didn't necessarily go on a lot of them, everybody knew what they were supposed to do when they got there.
Yeah, nobody's standing around going, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly. It was we got there and everybody got to work.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's cool, man. So, you're into, you're talking about, that was during the summer. Are trapping efforts, are you trying to currently trap now, or is that kind of at a hiatus until you move into denning season and you pick up the trapping again next summer? How do you determine that?
So our goal that we set out, and it was a pretty lofty goal, was to get a total of 20 collars out. So when this trapping season started, I think we had either 6 or 7 that were out. Most of those were either in the North or South Delta. Mm-hmm. So we started trapping in Southwest, and like I said, over the course of the summer, we were able to get all of those collars out. And so now we have, we started out with, I think, 6 collars in 3 counties, and we have now 21 collars in, I think, 8 counties. And so, number one, it vastly expands the data we're going to be able to get.
Yeah.
And, I think the most we've ever had out has been somewhere between 20 and 30. So we've got all those collars out. So as far as the trapping and collaring, that stuff's done. And then I've just recently ordered some more collars. They're being manufactured right now. So we'll have 10 more by the time we start next summer.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So moving into let me get somewhere first. I want to talk to you about the denning season stuff. But hearing you talk about, I've heard you mention a couple things like habitat and a den tree and cartoon den tree. So break down for me. Let's do this one first. If I was to be describe to me what, where's a bear going to hang out? What's good habitat for a black bear?
Mm-hmm. Well, so to back up a little bit, people ask, do bears truly hibernate? When you think about hibernation, typically you're talking about smaller things like a lot of smaller mammals, rodents in particular, that go into an involuntary, extremely deep sleep. So you're talking about heart rate of just a couple per minute.
Torpor.
Super, super low. Well, that would be considered true hibernation.
Okay.
And then torpor is sort of a lighter sleep. It's still a prolonged period of inactivity. It can involve wakes and sleeps, kind of, what they call torpor bouts. So you have, times that you're actually not asleep, but you're still in the den. And it's more of a, I say denning instead of hibernation, even though hibernation is a lot more kind of ubiquitous.
Right.
But all that being said, it's not really so much because of the weather. It's triggered by photoperiod. And then the reason for it, it's overcome a lack of resources. So you build up the whole fat layer that can sustain you this whole time. Metabolic rate, heart rate, breathing, all that is suppressed. So you're using less fuel for the fire, so to speak.
Sure.
And you're going through all this period of denning. And so for females, when they go into the den, that's when they actually have their cubs as well. And so,
right.
Like I said before, breeding season is July and August. Mm-hmm. And so they'll actually breed then. And they go through a period of what's called delayed implantation, where they actually will not implant and start to actually grow that offspring. That offspring those embryos don't begin to develop until they go into the den. And what that allows them to do is build up that fat layer over the entire, fall and early winter to sustain them, and then to also feed the cubs and nurse them and all, take care of them in the den. So it's a really cool adaptation that is not very commonly seen, in mammals, the way they do that. So they go into a den. That could be in a tree. That could be in a blowdown. Could be in a log. There's some excavation dens where they'll actually dig out a creek bank or something.
Yeah,
it's pretty rare. Could be a briar thicket. Those are always my favorite. And and then they'll go in and do their thing in den, and then come out in the springtime.
Gotcha. So July, August, they're breeding. A sow gets bred. She's not actually, because she's not actively growing a cub inside her until she decides to in this denning period. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Mm-hmm. So typically a mammal will have that embryo fertilized, or have that egg fertilized, and then the embryo implants into the uterus, and then immediately starts developing.
Starts growing, yeah.
Yeah. So it's, technically you can call that whole thing gestation, but like I said, the main part of the actual development occurs in the den, and then when those cubs are born, they're only 8 or 10 ounces.
No way.
Very small, yeah. So whenever we come to do the den checks in early March, those cubs are only 5 or 6 weeks old. Wow. And usually 2 or 3 pounds. So,
yeah.
So they start out really small. They'll put on weight pretty quick. But I know I got a new little girl around the house. I know my wife wishes she could have had our child at 8 ounces and everything been okay.
I had no idea they were that tiny when they were born. Mm-hmm. What do they? This is going to seem like a silly question. When they get to the time when you're doing den checks, and they're 2 to 3 pounds, is the mom what are they eating? Are they still like
They're
nursing?
nursing.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they're still nursing at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they'll nurse all the way through, while they're in their den, and then I can't remember right offhand the exact time period that they're weaned, but it's shortly after they come out of the den, and then they'll start kind of foraging along with her, and putting on weight as all that goes.
Gotcha. Are there any? So I mean, like I'm relating back to like when we hear about turkeys, you hear the word like nesting success a lot. Mm-hmm. Like, are there any like major obstacles to denning success, quote unquote? Like, are there predators for cubs? Are there like certain dangers for cubs, or do most of them make it typically?
Yeah, there's some predation that takes place. Obviously, they're right there with the sow, and so there's not a whole lot. And again, this depends on where you are in the country, the habitat type, the density of other bears in the area. A male will kill those cubs to induce that female to go into heat again, so that she can be bred and then have his offspring. And so, what a lot of the mortalities. So you've got car impacts and that kind of thing. You've got accidents, drownings, falling. A lot of bears den in trees. The one you were talking about was 60 feet up.
Yeah.
And so you could possibly fall out of a tree. There's a lot of accident type things that happen, and then there's some abandoned issues every now and then. But like I said, yeah, it's there can definitely be different types of mortalities, and that's going to vary depending on that population, the habitat, and just sort of what the situation is.
Gotcha. So I mean, like that 60 foot up in a tree, when they get time to get out of the den, is that little cub able to just shimmy down the tree at that point, or are they holding on to mama, or how does that work?
I've never actually watched a bear come out of a tree like that. A lot of times she will carry them. Even so, we've got records of a sow swimming the Mississippi River with cubs, and so they were on her back, and she swam all the way across. So yeah, she takes good care of them. During that time, and so if they're not able to, but during the den checks, we'll actually hold the cubs and take measurements on them, and the claws are like Velcro. I mean, you have to peel them off one at a time off of your shirt. You'd be amazed how strong they already are, and what kind of, like they just, whatever you put them on, they just stick. It's incredible. So, I mean, black bears are excellent climbers, and they start that really early on, and so it's not quite as daunting of a task as you think it would be. Like obviously for one of us, I mean, black bears climb really well.
Sure. Yeah, and this is when you're holding them at 2 to 3 pounds.
Right. Yeah. This is before they come out of the den.
That's the action I'm trying to get in on, man. I want to get on one of those den checks.
Come on.
I would love to.
Yeah,
that'd be super cool. Well, I'd say, I mean, I wanted to do the thing last summer too, but I mean, that's my own fault. It's whose fault that is.
Yeah, I mean, when you're as famous and important as yourself, it's just hard to schedule stuff.
I'm important to my dogs and my wife. Other than that, it's all just.
That's good enough. That's all we can ever hope for.
Habitat. So, in the talking about, I want to be for sure to touch on this, because again, I feel like there's, me included, like as far as like what does a black bear need to survive. We were talking about how many black bears there were, back before the levee system and the ag fields, and so I mean, what is in today's Mississippi, what does a black bear need to thrive?
Corn feeders.
Okay. Problem solved. Crap.
And there are plenty to go around, so that's good.
That's a fact.
No, but typically black bears are omnivores, so they can make use of a lot of different types of food items. So about 90% is going to be plant matter. The other 10% could be carrion, so it could be dead carcasses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In densely populated areas, they have bears a lot around gut pits and deer, piles, that kind of thing. But typically it's going to be seasonally available, some type of vegetation. So I've actually seen bears go out and feed in food plots on and planted actually green stuff that you would see a deer feed on. So it could be mass that becomes available, like muscadines, persimmons, different berries, beauty berries and huckleberries and that kind of thing.
Can I tell you a story?
Absolutely.
So I was in Colorado. We were filming a sheep hunt, and I had never done a sheep hunt before. It was very exhausting hunt. And so
that's the only thing that I know about sheep hunting.
So I knew it was bad. I was like, I don't know if it's just bad on me, but then when I looked up and Brad Ferris was struggling, I was like, yeah, this is bad. So we get to the end of day one, and I just shed my pack, I shed my camera gear, and I'm just laying there, and we're just gathering ourselves before we start hiking back, because we still had to hike back down to camp. And I roll over and I look and I'm like, are those wild strawberries? And the guide that we were hunting with says, yeah, that's wild strawberries. And I just start gorging myself. I guess from just
hyperphagia.
Yeah, and so I just start gorging myself on these strawberries. But this couple that was with us, they look over and I just hear them laughing. And I'm like, what are y'all laughing at? They were like, well, those wild strawberries are super good to eat, but we normally don't see anything eat them but black bears. And I ain't never seen a black bear go as hard at them as you're going at them right now.
Yep.
See, I was in hyperphagia.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. And so down here, maybe the equivalent of that would be like blackberries.
Okay. Yeah.
But like I said, any of those seasonally available, berries and like I said, even green, new growth and stuff. Here in the South, the logs, when the trees fall, those logs get rotten really fast, and so you have a lot of grubs and and beetles and that kind of thing. They love to get into those. I was actually sent a video over the summer on a property we trapped earlier in the South Delta of a bear that they had just come up on this bear, and they looked at it, and it was like, what is he doing? It looked like it was digging in the ground, and he had dug up and was eating a yellow jacket nest, and those yellow jackets were wearing him out. And finally, it was like, okay, I can't stand it anymore. And he swatted around and kind of ended up running off. But,
no way.
Yeah. So they'll, it's pretty widely obviously beehives, they'll get into the beehives and stuff, but even wild, yellow jackets, ground nesting insects like that, they'll get after them too.
That's wild.
Must be some really great tasting stuff to take that kind of punishment.
There ain't no way. I wouldn't even get to the point of being stung once. I would just look at it and be like, nah, it's not worth it.
Man, I found one weed eating around the house not long ago, and I was like, he can have those yellow jackets, because that is not on my list of things
part
to
of
do.
that. Yeah. That's wild. Where do you see, and I guess we can kind of round off the conversation at this point, if you, if I were to say, Anthony, if I could promise you a world where there's not going to be any unforeseen obstacles pop up, and if you draw up your dream scenario for the future of black bears in Mississippi, what would that be for you with the position that you're in now?
So I tell people that we're not, moving bears. We're not encouraging. We're not restocking bears. We're simply monitoring the natural increase that's occurring. Mm-hmm. So in a perfect world, we would continue to do that. We would continue to get good, solid data and have a good population estimate. And eventually, we would get to the point where we could implement a season. Mm-hmm. Because again, they were an important game species then, and we hope that they follow that same trajectory that all of these other game animals that we take for granted now follow. And in conjunction with that, if you had to basically boil the two objectives that I have down, it's going to be solid research and solid public education and outreach. So at the same time, we're being proactive, engaging as many people as we can about how to live with black bears with as little conflict as possible. And, like we said before, those little changes that you can make to forego a potential problem that might happen before it even becomes an issue.
Yeah, makes sense. So, I mean, that's your goal then. At the end of it is for these to be an established game species in the state.
Certainly, that's not the end of it. We've had deer have been game species for quite a while now. We still have a deer program.
Right. So, sure.
So
fair point.
To kind of continue that on, but that definitely that would be a really good plant the flag on the moon kind of accomplishment here in the
milestone.
state.
Yeah.
Huge milestone. That would be one of the end zone dances that we as an agency, and I guess me personally, could do, even though I'm standing on other people's shoulders in this role. But that's definitely one thing that we could say, look at this success story. This is just another conservation story that we have been able to have, that we've taken this species from the brink of extinction all the way to we have a healthy enough population to where it's huntable now.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I want to see, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
I want to be at a sporting goods store, at a deer camp, at somewhere where other sportsmen are around, and I want to hear somebody not giving a speech, just in passing, in conversation at the dinner table, whatever. I want to hear somebody talking about black bears with the same respect and appreciation for the animal as we talk about these other ones.
Yeah.
That's what I want to hear.
Absolutely.
That would be so cool.
Yeah. And like I said, that's the trajectory that we're on. Mm-hmm. And I think definitely within my career that I will have the honor of having a hand in. I mean, that's why we got into this field. That's why we got into wildlife and fisheries to begin with, was whether it's from a consumptive aspect with hunting and actually participating in that conservation, or whether it's as a more of a regulatory agency that does the biology side or the enforcement side or whatever it is. Like, that's the big picture stuff. And to have a part in that, and like the timing that I will be able to contribute to that, is just like it's humbling. It's awesome. And that's why I'm so thankful to be in this position, because that's where we're headed.
Yeah. We live in a very cool time to be a hunter, a conservationist, and an outdoorsman in this state.
Absolutely.
I think. Where can, just to double down on it, you've mentioned some of these already, but where can everyone find what you're doing, top to bottom?
Yeah, so mdwfp.com is the main agency's website. We plan on doing another bigger and better Bear Week in the spring, so definitely be looking out for that.
Yep.
Probably going to be sometime end of March, 1st of April.
Okay.
And then, the Mississippi black bear photos, that's, again, any type of trapping activity that we've done, and then, that'll continue. Anything that's shared about Bear Week, it'll go on that group too. And so to keep up with, happenings around the state, bears that are collared, people are seeing bears, the research that we're doing, all that stuff is posted on that group.
Gotcha. And when all this goes up, we'll share all those sites and different platforms on the pages and everything. But yeah, cool stuff, man. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
We'll have to, Lord willing, we can get together and I can get in on one of these den checks. I want to do one of the workups too, but the den checks are going to be what's coming up next. I want to get in on one of those.
Yeah, well, so the den checks actually involve a workup too, because we sedate that sow.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a lot less about her, because we've already, unless we have to adjust a collar or something, we've already got the data.
You already know where she's at. Yeah.
Yes, it's mostly about the cubs, but it does involve kind of a workup and working up the cubs as well. So it's
gotcha.
You'll get a little taste of everything on those.
Definitely. Cool, man. Well, I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Enjoyed you having me.
There it is. There it is.
Man, I almost got through the whole thing without messing up, and here we are.
Oh, guys, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. I would thoroughly encourage you to look up some of these resources that he's pointed out. I would encourage you as well. If you haven't, if you want to, I think if someone, like if you want to garner an appreciation and a better understanding for bears that you didn't know you could have, go listen to those podcasts that Clay did on Hulk Collier. Go listen to the ones he did on the Mississippi River. Keep up with the work that Anthony's doing. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can hit up the Primos page or my personal page. And we're going to get out of here. As always, thank you for listening to the Speak the Language podcast.